This is one I'm super pumped about this particular part of the morning because this we're going to talk about one of these journeys that's just such a huge one that's just really exciting the way God does this for us, and the way it's super interesting the way He does it for Moses. So we're going to talk about the journey of identity with this one. So identity is central at the heart of the Moses story. Is this question of identity, and we get the first sort of like very on the nose, hey, this is going to be a thing. I think the way the story's told there at the bush, where Moses famously asks Yahweh, once he's commissioned to do this thing, he says to God, "Who am I?" Right? That I should, and he goes on. And he really it's impressive, I guess, how Moses just keeps coming back at the God of the universe this way until there's just a lot of rebuttals. I would think, you're in the midst of this moment with, the Almighty. There's a bush that's on fire in front of you. You got your bare feet and the audible voices coming, from the creator of the universe. And you're coming back at him, being like, yeah, but. Way to go, Moses. Points for chutzpah. But a lot of it centers on that question, that who am I question. And it's not just a question of who am I, really, who am I really, but that's there and becomes more a part of Moses' journey later. It starts with who am I? It's little old me. I don't deserve to go do what you're saying, or I'm not the man for the job, or whatever. Okay, but that question will define so much of Moses' story as the Exodus unfolds. At the end, if we just fast forward for a second, we get a sense, I think, of where Moses is, and it's really beautiful. And it's not really the end, really. I guess maybe it's the midpoint, let's say, but it's a significant journey that's happened now. This is after they have escaped through the Red Sea. Yahweh has parted the sea. They've come through on dry land, and on the other side, they make art. That's their response to what God has done in their lives. They write this song. Moses and the Israelites do. Miriam's involved in all of that, and the song's beautiful. It takes its place among all the classic story songs that you know and love. This is a story song, and it's preserved for us in Exodus 15. And right at the beginning, we get this. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to Yahweh. They said, "I will sing to Yahweh, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea." All songs start with, all great songs start with violence. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea. Yahweh, now listen, picture Moses saying this. Yahweh is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. All right. If we just start from Yahweh is my strength and song, 2 sentences, 7 personal pronouns. Me, my, I, right? Moses is saying, this is who I am. He is my song, right? He's my walking out music. It's very personal, right? This is my God. Now, that's where Moses is in Exodus 15. That is not at all where he is at the bush. A lot has happened. A lot of ground has been gained. Yahweh has led him on a whole journey at that point. And that's the journey that I'm interested in, because you get this sense in Exodus 3, backing up now, Not you don't get a sense. You it's obvious. Moses doesn't know who he's talking to. Moses also, we find this out, like if we pay attention to the story, Moses really doesn't understand who he is as a person. But that is understandable. Why? Well, let's think about Moses' background. Yeah? Moses is a Hebrew, right? Born to Hebrew parents. But born where? In Egypt. So, like, why? Well, it's complicated. At first, they were slaves, if we go all the way back to Joseph's story. Then they were basically like expats, prominent in society, as Joseph rises to power. Then they were like sort of a people group that was looked askance at as this Pharaoh rose to power, didn't know or care about Joseph. Then they were back to slaves. And like now they're slaves. That's where Moses is born. So he's born as a Hebrew in Egypt. Okay, that's already like it's complicated. So Moses, where are you from? Well, it's that kind of thing. Okay, but then Moses is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. All of his, by the way, there's nobody like at his class reunion, no guys. Right? They all are actually dead, thanks to the edict of Pharaoh. He was so he's already weird now among the boys of his age group because the rest of the boys don't exist. He grows up in Pharaoh's house, a stranger in a strange place, but then he's there for long enough to where that gets inside of him, surely. Then he has to flee as a fugitive to Midian, yet another place where he finds himself. He is displaced again and again as a human being. And he is, if you don't think Moses isn't carrying baggage around because of all that, you just don't think Moses is a real person. Because if that was you, if that was your dad, if that was your child, if that was your best friend, you would see there's baggage that comes with that. We don't always think about that. We don't think about Moses' like checkered identity and what it must have been like for him to sort of wrestle with that. But I think the text is pointing us to it. Even the way that when he shows up in Midian, the girls go back and tell their dad about this guy at the well, and they say, this Egyptian helped us. Like, he has become that. But now he's not that. He's had to like give that up entirely and cut ties because of his, life of or moment of crime. And now he's in Midian. He's in Midian for all this time. And he gets married to this woman. He has a child. Do you remember what he names his boy, firstborn? This is like a 10, 15 pointer. Gershom. Here's 28 points. Ready? What does Gershom mean?
I was a foreigner.
That's it. Yep. Foreigner. He names his poor child foreigner. You don't name your actual person of a child that way unless it's front of mind for you all of the time. Because who's this boy now? Now this boy's, he like, it's like he's projecting, Moses is, all of his, displacement on his child, but also recognizing that whatever his displacement is, Gershom's like leveled up even more because now he's a Midianite. He's not a Midianite, but here he is, born in Midian. Does that make him a Midianite? I don't know. His dad wasn't from Midian. Where was his dad from? His dad barely knows half the time. So Gershom now is this emblem of Moses' internal turmoil regarding his own identity. And this is going to be a journey on which Yahweh desires to lead Moses as the Exodus story unfolds. What I want to do is look at a very, very interesting, kind of mind-blowing, super confusing, maybe, moment, a milestone in that journey. Okay, so here's the placement. This is not going to be, there's moments in the Exodus story, burning bush, moment in the throne room with the staff to the serpent dragon things, crossing of the Red Sea. These are, giving of the Ten Commandments, manna. There's going to be like the greatest hits on the album that drops. There's the Exodus greatest hits. And then there's this B-side that are the deep cuts. This is one of the deep cut stories. It does not preach well. Okay? So this story happens after the bush. The commission has been given. Moses then, he's got this whole life in Midian, yeah? He's part of the family business, this shepherding enterprise. Okay. He has to go back now. Sinai's like a ways off. I told you that before, like wherever, like where Jethro and their home is. This is, I was in this part of the world a couple of years ago, stayed at a Bedouin camp, and this, you would think no one is grazing anything here because this is all just brown rock. And if you are going to graze anything, you are not going to set up in this verdant Irish pasture for the next 2 years. You will be traveling and traveling a lot because the sheep will eat everything available in about 12 minutes, and then you will go on. Moses has been doing that for a while now. He's far from home. Now he's got to go back to his father-in-law, and he's got to ask off from work because Yahweh wants him to go to Egypt. All right, that's where we meet him in this story. I'm going to read it, and then what I want to do is I'm just going to play a 12-minute clip from Holy Ghost Stories because I told this story as a story, and it's one of those, like a lot of these narrative texts, that tells better than it teaches sometimes, which, it was given to us as a story, and sometimes we're like, no, it's an epistle. I'm going to treat it like an epistle. So we'll let it be a story. I'm going to read it, and then we'll just sort of sit in it for 12 minutes, and then we'll talk about it. But I think that's going to be the most effective way of navigating that. But the reason is, this is a huge milestone in Moses' journey of identity. All right. This is in chapter 4, beginning of verse 18. Post burning bush. Then Moses went back to his father-in-law Jethro and said to him, "Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt and see if they are still living." Jethro said to Moses, graciously I might add, "Go in peace." Now in Midian, Yahweh told Moses, "Return to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took God's staff in his hand, the one he'd been given, that had been sort of enhanced at the bush. Yahweh instructed Moses, "When you get back to Egypt, make sure you do before Pharaoh all the wonders that I've put within your power, but I will harden his heart so that he won't let the people go. And you will say to Pharaoh, 'This is what Yahweh says. Israel is my firstborn son. I told you, let my son go that he may worship me, but you refused to let him. And look, I am about to kill your firstborn son.'" On the trip, he's headed now back to Egypt. At an overnight campsite, it happened that Yahweh confronted Moses and intended to put him to death. So Zipporah, Moses' wife, took out a flint, cut off her son's foreskin, threw it at Moses' feet, and said, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." So he, Yahweh, let him, Moses, alone. At that time, Zipporah said, "You are a bridegroom of blood," referring to the circumcision. Next verse. Now Yahweh had said to Aaron, go and meet Moses in the wilderness, and Moses and Aaron reunite. What in the actual world is happening here? This is the most bizarre parentheses in all of biblical narrative, I think. I have questions. Now, this, though, is a good exercise in reading biblical narrative. Okay, so we're not like, if we jump to application, it's going to get weird. So let's not do that. Instead, let's just sit in this moment for a second. Let's just ask intelligently and thoughtfully some questions before we sort of jump into the Holy Ghost story's telling of this story. Let's ask this. What do we know? All right, so much that we don't know about this moment. What do we know? Moses doesn't, like, when Moses goes to Jethro, had the burning bush experience, what does Moses say to Jethro? Better, tell me this. What does Moses not say to Jethro? Talk about burying the lead. It seems very sort of like Moses is circumnavigating the issue here. He's just been commissioned by the God of the universe to rescue a people, 1 million strong, from oppression in the heart of the greatest empire in the history of the world, maybe, at least the most powerful empire at this time. He's going to go lead that charge. He's got to go home and ask for time off from his father-in-law for it. And he's like, listen, Jethro, I want to go back to Egypt and see if my people are still alive. That's like, I'm sorry, what? Like, don't miss that. This is a window into Moses' heart, the state of his emotional self, how much he's comfortable embracing or admitting or sharing. There is a lot packed into what is not happening in this moment. And we're fools, foolish readers at least, if we're missing it. Okay. Next. What do we know about Gershom? This is a men's retreat. Right? Yep. Okay. What do we know about Gershom's penis?
Not circumcised at this point.
It's got a foreskin on it. What do we know about Moses's? Gershom is of age. People vary. How old is he here? Maybe teens. Seems like maybe based on a later reunion, he might have some young children even at this point. Could be 30 years old. Grown man. It's not like we haven't gotten around to it yet. He has intentionally not been circumcised. Let's just sit with that. One more. Well, two more. What else do we know? All right. Zipporah. What is Zipporah's part in this? God goes to kill Moses, and then, where did my translation? Verse 25, first word. So, Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin. A, B, Tuesday, purple. Like, how are these things related at all? But for Zipporah, as soon as it starts happening, she runs to get her son with a knife in her hand. Why? She knows something. All right? Let's just leave that there. Once it happens, Zipporah famously takes this bit of flesh and chucks it at her husband's foot and yells at him, "You are a bridegroom of blood." I'm going to go out on a limb. I've been married for a minute. There's a little tension in this marriage about this thing, whatever this thing is. This is not the first time it's been discussed. Finally, What do we know? A lot of questions about this, but what do we know? We know that Zipporah is on the road with her former fugitive husband, leaving her entire life in Midian. Yeah? A life, by the way, that seems to have been pretty cushy. Her dad's got this whole business. He's a man of standing, priest, maybe high priest of the entire. She is leaving her home, her family, and her entire standing to what? Who knows, even? For who? We're barely sure at this point. Moses feels so complicated about it, he won't even say it out loud to his father-in-law. All right, these are the things we know. Now, with that in mind, we'll just let this story be a story for a second and sit in it together.
Moonlight shines pale on the mountain of God. Silver-striped hawk moths flit and flick against the star-speckled sky. Bug-eyed gerbils hunt desert locusts while nervously evading the red foxes hunting them. In his tent, a sleeping Moses surely dreams. Fluttering eyelids and staccato breaths interrupt the stillness, his subconscious processing what happened before the sun set on this portentous day. Green leaves wrapped in fire, his bare feet on electrified soil, heat enshrouding his skin, that voice. Moses. If he wakes before dawn, it's likely thanks to a mind that won't stop asking questions. Can he just uproot his life and go to Egypt? What will his father-in-law say to losing his partner in the shepherding enterprise he's built? What about his children, grandchildren? What about Zipporah? She is a Midianite through and through. To take her away from her home, their people, and what waits for them there? Will those people follow him? Will the Egyptians demand to know why he left so abruptly all those years ago? Is he still wanted? They'll kill him if they get their hands on him. And all this for people who are not even his people anymore. Were they ever? Why would Yahweh ask me to do this? Who am I? Back home, Reuel, or Jethro, as he's called by those close to him, rests his hand on Moses' shoulder. What is it you need to tell me, my son? Please, I need to go to Egypt. I want to go to my people and see if they're still alive. Ah, Jethro, his face a crowded map of deep lines, looks with kind eyes at his aging son-in-law. Of course, who knows how long Moses has left to connect with his siblings, or perhaps even his parents, if they're still around. Go in peace. But is it Aaron, or Miriam, or Amram and Jochebed who are on Moses' mind? Is he thinking more of his extended family, the Hebrews, wondering as to their survival under the yoke of oppressive kings? Or when he says, my people, is he thinking of the Egyptians? Specifically, perhaps, those who would see him pay for the murderous crime he committed 4 decades ago. Perhaps it's this last option given that Yahweh has just told him, "Go, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead." If that's the case, then if Yahweh's mission doesn't work out, he could start fresh in Egypt with his wife and children, grandchildren, perhaps even reclaim his position as a royal among his people. Does Moses consider such things? A caravan trundles north and then westward from the heights of Midian toward the lowlands of the Nile Delta. Zipporah watches her husband, then smiles at Gershom, their firstborn. Her eyes wander to the others, the rest of their children, grown now with children of their own. 40 years with Moses. 40 years since that day at the well when he waltzed in and charmed her. Charmed her father, really. He was so taken with this Egyptian man, so happy to match her with someone worthy of his daughter. Even now, his smiling paternal eyes flash in Zipporah's mind, those eyes full of tears as Jethro said goodbye to his daughter, to his grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Does Zipporah cry now as she walks away from her home, wondering if she'll see her father again? Does grief manifest in anger? Why did Moses have to say yes? Oh, why couldn't he find another way of assuaging this God, Yahweh? What kind of God would ask someone to leave their home? And poor Gershom, living for years with the name Moses gave him, a foreigner, and now forced to see that meaning fulfilled as his father rips them away from everyone they know and leads them into a strange land. In Midian, she was the daughter of the high priest. In Egypt, what will she be? Zipporah's pulse crescendos as she holds close the glowing coal of her anger. Red sky, disappearing sun. Time to make camp. With the tents up, a fire is lit. Moses sits, finally, stares into the fire. In his hand, the staff of God, the one that became a serpent at his feet a few weeks ago when Yahweh commissioned him to what? Announce to the great Pharaoh that hundreds of thousands of Hebrew slaves, critical to Egypt's economy, are free now? What will Pharaoh say to that? Better, how many seconds will elapse before he orders Moses' execution? And then what? Moses' children made to be slaves, surely, alongside the Hebrews. At least he never circumcised Gershom. Perhaps without that condemning marker, Gershom will be able to take up with the Egyptians. He does, after all, have an Egyptian father. And maybe... Crack! Something electrifies the air around the campfire. And then, what? Moses is accosted by a presence, wrestled like Jacob that night on the banks of the river, but this time there is no contest. Or Moses is suddenly paralyzed, instantly overwhelmed by a ferocious force that renders him powerless. Or a swirling black spirit issues from the campfire, first curious and then suddenly consuming, stretching Moses' mouth wide and pouring its frigid self into his throat. One of these, or none of these, the exact circumstances of what happens this night will forever be shrouded in mystery, but one thing will be remembered. Recorded by Yahweh's penman in language somehow both stark and nebulous. Yahweh encounters Moses and seeks to put him to death. Why would... But Zipporah seems to know. With Moses in the deathlock, Zipporah moves quickly, runs to a saddlebag, rummaging through it as she screams to someone to fetch Gershom. In moments, the full-grown firstborn son of Moses and Zipporah lies before his mother, who holds a flint knife aloft, rage and apology and exasperation and contempt flashing in her eyes. Gershom prone, his tunic pulled aside, groggy now, perhaps, from the concoction rubbed onto his gums by Zipporah. Beside this scene, Moses, still in the grip of Yahweh, teetering on the edge of death. The others are shrieking now, surely terrified and confused. Zipporah screams at them to be silent, bends over her son's midsection, and draws the knife across his flesh. Blood erupts from the incision, but she continues undaunted. A minute later, and she stumbles to her feet, holding aloft a piece of her son. Gershom's wife rushes to him, does her best to mitigate the bleeding at his groin. "There!" Zipporah cries. Moses' eyes, already wide as he struggles for life, widen further as his wife hurls their son's mangled foreskin at his feet. "You," she shouts at Moses, "you are a husband of blood!" Immediately, Yahweh releases his grip, leaving Moses and Zipporah and Gershom all gasping for different reasons. Morning. Bread bakes over campfire coals. Gershom moans awake. Moses readies the donkeys. And Zipporah broods. Yahweh, though, Yahweh draws the sunrise from the horizon with a glad heart. Zipporah, daughter of the high priest of pagan Midian, does not understand, of course. In her eyes, circumcision is just some version of a twisted sacrifice demanded by a fickle God bent on making humans pay for their existence. She couldn't know the covenant nature of this act. The generations-old truth that in the loss of a part of one's self, there is the promise of gain. In the exposure created by this removal, the promise of protection. This is the nature of covenants. Brought up amidst the landscape of capricious pagan gods, Zipporah had no framework for circumcision. No wonder she wanted no part of it for her son. But Moses could have known, should have known, should have helped Zipporah understand, should have circumcised his son long ago. But he did not, chose to exempt his child from the mark of the Hebrews' covenant with their God. Why would he mark this son as one of those people? It was a choice, the final, full welcome of a new identity, a leaving behind, an exodus. But if Moses is to lead the people of Yahweh out of the kingdom of Pharaoh, he must at least be open to being a person of Yahweh himself.
Fascinating story. A moment, I think, that makes a lot more sense if we're patient and we're thoughtful and we sit inside the story for a second. And it's a moment that is a huge milestone on Moses' journey of becoming with regard to identity. The question is this man going to embrace his identity as a person of the people of Yahweh? Is he going to embrace it so that he talks about it out loud? Is he going to embrace it in a way that he welcomes his children into this identity? Or is he going to keep that identity and the God it represents at arm's length. Up until this point, it seems he's doing this. And thanks to his wife, his pagan Midianite wife, she makes it when God has clearly just been fed up with this continual posture from Moses. She rescues her husband by doing something that he had been too reluctant to do. She didn't like it. She didn't understand it. But as I said at the end there, Moses should have. Moses could have. And what God is doing with Moses is slowly but surely reminding him, you are one of these people. They are not them. They are you. What does it look like for us to be led on a journey of identity as men? I had somebody ask me at a meal the other day. This is a good friend of mine who said, how did your relationship with God become as personal as it is? And I thought for a second, and here is the reason I gave. It's a long conversation. There's a lot of ways to answer that question for any of us, but here was my answer. One word, and the word was risk. I said, Mitch, it's the times that I have embraced risk for the sake of following God that have been the times that brought us close together and made my relationship with him more personal than it was before. It was a risk, but I felt like it was right in line with what God was doing in my life. It was a risk to get married at 21 years old. My wife was 19. But that shaped me and shaped my relationship with him when I saw how faithful he was. It was a risk we were in Alabama doing ministry. We'd been from Florida. We were in this place, in Alabama doing ministry. And I just felt, I didn't have language for it at the time necessarily, but it was a clear calling from God to remove ourselves from that place and go somewhere with a lot less light and be light. And so we sold everything that we had and moved to New York City to plant a church. That was risky. And it wasn't until after I took that risk, it was during that time in New York, that I had a genuine sort of crisis of faith related to this realization that for my whole life up to that point, I had been carrying around a faith that was a hand-me-down faith rather than a faith that was my own. And suddenly I'm in this place where everyone around me is an atheist, it feels like. And this culture is bumping up against my identity. And I'm asking myself for the first time, really, in a very serious way, is this actually my identity? That was risky. And I found myself so much closer to him on the other side of that. Having kids, I didn't want to have kids because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready because we didn't have enough money. I wasn't ready because I wasn't a good enough man. But we had kids because I was pretty sure that's what God wanted us to do. And it was a risk. And in that risk is where I met him again and again and again. In my life, some of the biggest milestones in my relationship with the Lord have been moments where he's called me out into deeper water and I have not wanted to go and went anyway. It was a risk for Moses to identify his son, to like seal his destiny as this ill-fated member of the Hebrew race. It was a risk. And it was a risk that he didn't want to take. And it was standing in the way of his relationship with Yahweh. Wherever you take a risk in the direction of God, I'm promising you, he will reward you. And what you'll find on the far side of that risk is a relationship and a greater willingness to identify with the one who rewarded the risk. If you won't take risks for him, you will not get close to him. You will not feel that he is the core. He will not be your song. It's only after all of that that Moses gets on the other side of the sea and writes those words. It could only have happened on the other side of all of that. But that's the kind of, this is who I am, deep down in your bones identity that is waiting for all of us on the far side of this journey. And even along the way, like in increasing measure, again and again, he will draw us closer. He will invite us to identify with him, to stake who we are on what he is and what he's promised to do. And whenever we're willing to say, okay, yes, that's who I am, and that's who I'm going to be, and that's going to decide what I do, that is the journey. That's the journey that Yahweh wants to lead us on. Your identity is not in your allegiance to a certain football team. Your identity is not in being a United States citizen. Your identity is not you're a Star Wars person or you're not a Star Wars person. Your identity is not in your talent. Your identity is not in your wealth. Your identity is not in your power. Your identity is not in your family of origin. It's not in how hard you work as a man and how proud you are that you do. That is not who you are. And if it is, you are less than you could be. You are a man of God. You are a child of Yahweh. Are you going to embrace that identity and risk all the things that feel like they're at risk in embracing it? If you do, and to whatever extent you do, he will meet you, and it will go better for you than it would have if you didn't.